Thank you all for coming tonight. Anoushka, it's been
a while.
Yes, since the last time we've spoken. It's also been kind of a journey for you through this trilogy of EPs. Mm-hmm. And I guess my first question is, if you were a novelist, there are two kinds of writers. There are pantsers and plotters. So plotters know exactly how the story's going to go. They know the beginning, the middle, and the end. Pantsers just kind of create the characters and follow them, mm-hmm. By the seat of their pants. Mm-hmm. Which are you? When you set out on this journey through these three EPs, how much did you know about where it was going to go?
Hi, everyone. I love that analogy, and I like it because I called these mini albums chapters, so I was thinking in that way of being able to tell a story that unfolded over time. And so I think there was a bit of both, to be honest, because when I set out to start, I set myself a few parameters. Some were technical, where I wanted to put myself in a new situation on each chapter. So I wanted to work with a new producer for each one and kind of not repeat the musicians that would be there, so that it would bring out different things from me as well. I wanted to be in a different place for the same reason. And I wanted to approach each one with a blank slate, which I guess points to the former. I wanted to try and put myself in that situation of just being as open to inspiration as possible and to see what would happen if I just trusted that. So like kind of following an intuition that I want to work with this person for some reason and then get in a room together and find out why. Having said that, because I did want them to connect and weave into something that would make sense by the end, before I started chapter 1, I didn't know what that meant. But by the time I'd made chapter 1, I knew what that meant. So chapter 2 and chapter 3 had a loose direction, a hit point. I knew that I wanted chapter 2 to basically mean one thing, and I knew I wanted chapter 3 to mean one thing, and that would conclude the journey started in chapter 1.
Right. When you call things chapters, if these were chapters in a book, my question would be, what's the title of the book? Did you have a title?
My manager's yelling at me about that one because I never titled the book. And one of the things we're doing after this is now finally orchestrating all 3 chapters into one longer piece of music that I'll play as a sitarist with a full orchestra. And we've just called it chapters because we hit the deadline and I didn't have a name. I was thinking more fancifully. I got really obsessed with the fact that by accident, chapter 1, Forever for Now, if you take away chapter, Forever for Now had 5 syllables. And I thought, wouldn't it be cool if the chapters made a haiku? And that was kind of where my brain goes a little bit more than thinking of a title. So they do, they make a haiku.
So 5 syllables,
Forever
7,
for Now,
yeah.
How dark it is before dawn, we return to light.
Right.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah,
Okay.
so maybe that's the really long title of the whole thing.
But there's something to be said for chapters as an overarching title because it is a kind of episodic story as opposed to a through composed narrative. Having said that, I got the impression from chapter 3, We Return to Light, that there was definitely an arc that you were following in the creation of this set of pieces, where it begins in quiet, and it builds to the more energetic, high energy, high octane rhythmic stuff, and then you let us down easily. Was that something that you uncovered in the studio, or did you have that in mind first?
The details of the music that would symbolize that were all uncovered with the people in the room, but I did have that in mind. Because it's funny, getting the opportunity to talk like this is such a treat because you get to really dig into why you made something. But on the flip side, it's instrumental music where people will take what they need to take of it, and I have these huge stories to tell about what it's about. So take it with a pinch of salt. But for me, in writing it, I had an inner journey I wanted to process through making this music, which was about pain and how we survive pain and how we heal through pain. So chapter 1 was about more in the present moment, in transient moments, when you're in the eye of the storm, how do you get through it? And it became, one of the songs is titled "Stolen Moments," and there was a moment I had with my 2 kids in the garden where I just had a perfect moment. Single parenting is full of lots of imperfect moments. And I had a perfect moment where one was on the trampoline, one was on my lap. I was practicing. The sun came out, the kid fell asleep. And it was just so beautiful. And I just thought, occasionally you get a moment. And in that moment is paradise. And if we can be fully present for that moment, even if that whole month is traumatic, that moment carries me through. But I have to be there for it. I have to be there to experience that moment. And so that's what chapter 1 was about. And I thought about that in terms of the afternoon, that fleeting light. And so then my Indian classical trained brain got obsessed with the times of day. So chapter 1 was the afternoon into the sunset. Therefore, chapter 2 was now nighttime.
Right.
And I started to think about nighttime, not in some of the cliched, dark, negative ways that it can be thought about, but more as a place of like a womb-like regeneration. Like we sleep at night. We sleep at night to recover from the day, to wake up strong the next morning. So in a spiritual sense or a emotional journey sense, that we can take a longer night that's more than that moment healing, that we need a bigger pause to fully reset. A lot of things were going on in the world at that time as well. So I was thinking of that in a global sense, that it's not just personal, but we could take a big reset and go some different directions, you know?
Thank God that's not the case
Well,
anymore.
right. So I titled it How Dark It Is Before Dawn, to remind myself that like sometimes it feels like things are getting ever darker. And I just need to remind myself sometimes that like there is a cycle to everything. You know, there is a morning, there is a spring, there is an inhale, there is always something next that comes. And so however dark it feels, there's a dawn. So the last track on chapter 2 is called New Dawn. It was almost like I was running a relay race with myself. So I kind of left myself that crumb to pick up chapter 2. So I always knew chapter 3 would be about the morning. That now we've come out of that night, we've had that healing. And what does that mean? Like now we're in our power, in our strength, we're in the morning sun. It's hot, you know? Yeah. And so I knew I wanted to have the energy of morning on the music.
All right, your answer you were dropping a bunch of breadcrumbs there that I want to pick up and follow.
I just said backstage I suck at small answers, so you have to.
No. It's great. But so you mentioned your Indian classical training, and when it got to chapter 2, I mean, when I think of some of my favorite rags, they're often the nighttime ragas. You know, there's a sense of peacefulness in some of them, a sense of profundity in some of them. And, you know, I would think that training stood you in good stead, even if you weren't doing 30, 40-minute raga performances, you're doing 3 to 5, I guess there's one longer piece. But, you know, that background, that awareness of what night can mean in a musical sense.
Yeah, I suppose so. I mean, it's hard for me to analyze that because I was so immersed in that style of training. And, you know, North and South Indian classical music styles differ in that the South Indian music style doesn't have the same kind of stringent attachment to times of day. So it's interpreted in different ways. But for some people, it really has a lot of meaning. Some ragas are very particularly for 5 p.m. or 7 p.m. or 2 a.m. But if you go behind just the kind of random rules of it and you understand the science behind that set of notes, the vibration they create, why that may be, then I think you're absolutely right. A lot of my ragas, my favorite ragas, are nighttime ragas as well. They're either very sensual, very romantic, or they move into those deeper nighttime ragas where they become very internal. They're very introspective. Towards the early morning, they're very contemplative, very meditative. You know? So it's got a lot of power in that period.
The other thing you said that I wanted to pick up on was the idea of a cycle. And it struck me that looking at the titles of the different chapters and the way they kind of lead to each other, when you get to the end of chapter 3, and I tried this morning, I was like, what would happen if I went from the end of chapter 3 back to the beginning of chapter 1? And it works really well.
Yeah. I didn't have that in mind.
But it does work as a cycle. And, you know, it's not A to B to C. So it's not an arrow of time, it's a circle of time.
Well, I mean, this was an experiment, of course, because, like, what does it mean that they're chapters? Ultimately, they're 3 different releases, you know, so they do need to stand alone. They need to sound good as little individual pieces. But my hope was that they made sense together as well and told some kind of longer story. If you didn't know any of this, but you were just hearing the music, does it flow? And yeah, I did like the idea that it would end up being a circle.
Yeah. All right, let's talk a little bit specifically about the new one, about Chapter 3. You've brought Sarathi Korwar here with you as part of the band. He's a big part of this record. You've always been very kind of mindful of the people you collaborate with, whether they're singers like Olive Lentz or flamenco guitarists or, Nils Fromm, the pianist, Aruj Aftab, who's based here in Brooklyn. So I guess a general question first, and then we can get specific. What do you look for in a collab? How do you know when someone is right for you?
I operate a lot.
I'm sorry, that sounded like a dating question.
No, I was just going to say that's basically the same thing. It's attraction. I don't know how else to describe it. It's not something I can go back and analyze it later, but it's really more like as a listener, when do you feel that pull when someone's music pulls you in? That's usually the same thing that pulls me in towards wanting to work with them. Mm-hmm. It's a little more nuanced than that, because some things I might love listening to and I don't necessarily see myself in there. I'm just admiring it, like you say, that's a beautiful person walking down the street, but it doesn't mean you want to date them, So just to keep the analogy going. But yeah, sometimes I'm hearing someone and I feel like a hunger. Like it's like this feeling where either they've got something in their music, a quality that I don't have, but I love it. So I want to learn from it. I want to grow towards it. Or I sense a complementary thing that I want to be with that sound. It's very much that. It's and I just kind of, I'd say at this point, like 49 times out of 50, that's led me right. There's only been a couple times where maybe I've followed that hunch and it hasn't been as easy as I thought it would. It usually makes sense. Once you're in there, it makes sense.
Well, Chapter 3 has Sarathi Korwar, who you must have sensed a kindred spirit there. For folks who don't know his music, he's one of the central players on the London, I'll say, jazz scene. But like you, he's someone who has, a background in the South Asian diaspora and, just a completely Catholic, small c, sense of musical possibility. So how did that collaboration begin?
So Sarathi, and yes, he is an absolutely incredible musician and composer. His own works are beautiful. I need to just sidestep and say, like, this band is quite special because he's not unique in that. Like, everyone in the band is their own artist, their own composer, band leader, and they bring so much of that to my music and my show, which is why it's such a privilege to get to work with them. But Sarathi and I had been friends probably 7-8 years at this point, and coming out of the pandemic, I really wanted to go back and tour India because it had been the longest gap in my life that I hadn't been back. And so I didn't have any sort of quote-unquote material or a new album that I was touring. So I could have done anything at that point. And I just thought I'd take it as an opportunity to think of some musicians I hadn't worked with that I wanted to work with. And I formed a band. And then from our first show, it was electric. And we were doing at that point a lot of my old stuff and a lot of improv. And then I just stuck with that band through this whole chapter cycle. So even though it's not the instrumentation on the albums, we've basically been shoving out more and more of my old catalog with each release over the last 2 years. So it's been this really lovely, organic, live process of just allowing the chapters to infuse the tour more and more, and now we're playing the whole thing. But to come back to Sarathi, we've spent 2 years touring together. So I've gotten to know him a lot better. I love his musicianship. And because I wanted to work with Alam, who I'm sure we'll talk about, but Alam is another string player like me. So even though I wanted to work with him, I just knew that the two of us noodling around together in a room for a week was just going to get very, like, I don't know, just too much, and I knew we needed someone else who just thought from another perspective as well. And it just felt like, because Sarathi was right there with me on this tour, he was the perfect person to ask. And so, yeah, the three of us did Chapter 3.
All right, let's talk about the other major guest on Chapter 3, which is Alam Khan, son of Ali Akbar Khan. He plays, as his father did, the sarod. And there are moments, especially early in the record, where it's basically the two of you, and the dialogue between the two string instruments is really quite breathtaking. How did you? Have you known him your whole life, basically? Because Ali, his father, and your father were they came west very close together. His father
Pretty
came
much
a little
within a
further.
year of each other.
Yeah,
So, yeah. Yeah, so for anyone who doesn't know, so my father studied with one of the great gurus of Indian classical music, Baba Alauddin Khan Sahab, and he was the father of Ali Akbar Khan Sahab, who John was speaking about. So my father and Ali Akbar Khan Sahab were similar age, not quite the same, but they spent 7 or 8 years basically living at Khan Sahab's father's house, studying in this very traditional manner, a very immersive manner. And so they had a very close kind of co-disciple relationship that was like brothers.
Right.
And then that became very personal as well. My father's first wife was his sister. So they were also brother-in-laws for a while. My half-brother was his nephew. So there's a family connection too. But the musical connection's extraordinary because when you've learned alongside someone like that, you know. And so when they went on to both have their incredible individual careers, alongside that, their duets are some of the most iconic or the most iconic duets in Indian classical music because they had a certain type of telepathy. Even though by then they had their own identities, when they sat together, they could play in this way that was like one brain, and you could hear it in the way they just picked up each other's ideas. It's extraordinary, and it's on record. Just these improvisations between them are unbelievable. So Alam is Ali Akbar Khan Sahab's son. I'm, my dad's daughter. And in case anyone didn't know that. And so we didn't grow up together, but we've met since we were young. So I remember particularly like a one dinner we had when we were teenagers, and he laughed at me because I was talking about this one raga that I love so much. And I said, it always made me cry. And he was like, well, even when you're playing it yourself? And I was like, yeah, kind of. And he was like, you make yourself cry when you I just remember that. But we used that raga in the record. It's the last one. But we wouldn't have played together necessarily because even though we have that connection, we don't share a guru. Our fathers shared a guru, but we didn't come from that same immediate family tree in that way. And also, there's always been a lot of weight to the idea of playing together. We have had offers. There are a lot of, especially classical festivals in India, have asked over the years for us to play. And it's one of those many things that you could do it. There's nothing wrong with it. But like, who is it for and why is it happening? And to go and play a show that has some huge emotional weight about both of our fathers who've passed away, and it's for like a bunch of other people. It feels weird, just... whereas somehow in this series of chapters and in collaborations and in kind of small intimate recordings, I suddenly felt like I could go, hey, Alam, I'm wanting to do one that's slightly more India-facing, so it could be a nice opportunity for us to work together.
And it really sort of highlights the distinctive nature of both of your instruments, which, the sitar has become obviously familiar to many Westerners, the sarod somewhat less so, and just the kind of call and response between the two of you. Maybe it's not the telepathy that your respective fathers had, but there's an ease and
There is. I found it very moving working with him, I have to say. Like, there was a quality to sitting in a room and playing with him that I haven't had more than a handful of times. Obviously playing with my father, I had a much greater degree of that where we could play like that in that telepathic way. But there was something about the seed that traveled through these generations that when I sat with him, it was easier than almost anyone else that I've played with more, that we did just have a way of being able to catch things. It was beautiful.
So how does it work? You go into the studio, you've chosen your collaborators. Have you by that point chosen scales that you're going to work with? Do you have any kind
There's
of...
a lot of, WhatsApp voice notes that happen in the lead up to meeting in person, So I think with Aruj, there was one song that I'd kind of hummed an idea on the phone, and that helped because it gave us something to start with. That's Aruj Aftab. Yes, for chapter 1, yeah. And so on chapter 3, I think, again, there was one idea that we'd kind of discussed, but it was more we were discussing concepts. It wasn't so much the musical ideas. It was like, how do we want to do this? What are the things we want to achieve? What do we want the music to be? Less about the emotional themes and more in the music itself. And we talked a lot about, like, Indian classical music can be so fiery, it can be so virtuosic, and it can be very linear. There's a lot to have to kind of follow and think and listen if you're getting into that kind of virtuosic playing. And so, Lynn mentioned psychedelic trance or Goa trance, and it wasn't that this album is in any way that genre, but I kept talking about that feeling of being on a dance floor, you know, and the way that certain types of music allow you to enter a state a little bit more, and a lot of that is to do with repetition and simplicity. And so we were talking a lot about how can we marry, you know, the fact that we all love playing this type of complex, you know, virtuosic, complicated music, but how do we slot that into, you know, how do we play in a 7 where the groove feels like a 2? How do we do something that's an unusual scale but make it feel like any listener can enjoy it? It's not like, oh, that's complicated Indian classical music where you know, that kind of stuff we were talking a lot about before we met.
So not cerebral music, or it could be cerebral music, but it's also embodied.
It's embodied, exactly. Yeah, you just want people to be able to just listen and not have to think.
Right.
But it's there if you want to think. Like, there's more under there, but
Yeah.
it doesn't have to be about that.
So have you spent time in Goa?
Yeah, a lot. Yeah, from when I was, I guess, 18 till 28 or so, I used to go there every year, and I managed to carve out at times up to a couple of months where I'd take an album there to write, and so I spent a lot of time there. And then for various reasons, I kind of stepped back for a while, and I think it was too attached with a certain type of hedonism as well, and I just kind of needed to put that down. So I didn't end up going for a long time. And then at the start of this whole chapter journey was the first time I was back there with my kids, and I was just getting to reconnect with a place that had meant so much to me.
It's got to be very different with kids.
Yeah, I mean, it is in a
just from the reputation that Goa has.
I mean, there's a lot there. There's a lot there, but yeah. Yeah. My trip was a little different, for sure.
Yeah. Is it a well-earned reputation from your experience that you know, Goa is seen as, like, you know, I mean, in the 60s.
It's one of the birthplaces of, like, electronic music and psychedelic culture, so, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I remember talking to an American bansuri player, the flute player, who said, "Yeah, you know, I went to Goa in 1969, and I said, what, did you stand in line? Because, you know, it was like Westerners were making a beeline."
I mean, by the time I started going there, there were already people saying, oh my God, too many people are coming here now. It's changed. It's not what it used to be. Because obviously there are some travelers who'd been going there from the 60s or people who lived there. So I was already one of the late comers. And then in the time that I was going, I could see that continue. So, you know, I mean, hedonism has so many layers to it, doesn't it? And there's a kind of, there's an open-hearted, wide-eyed, hippie, one love aspect that is quite beautiful. And I've always been a fan of, you know. And then there was this kind of development of, like, oh, the mafia from this country is here at this party. And, oh, there's a bunch of girls standing on the road right there and those men standing in the car, like, right behind. Okay, this is getting ugly. Like, there's a different kind of hedonism that's suddenly not what what I'm talking about when I'm trying to capture something from my youth. There's a wide-eyed innocence to it as well.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of trance traditions around the world are built on exactly what you said. It's repetition and acceleration very often. Acceleration in Indian classical music, especially in North Indian classical music, is not done the same way it's done in, like, rock or Western classical music, right? Because it's...
I don't know, actually. How do you mean?
As an amateur tabla player many years ago, I was taught that, you know, if you're going to increase what you're doing is you're not playing fast, you're playing more notes within the tala, the rhythm cycle, and that.
Oh, I see what you mean. Yeah. There is a lot of that. Like, we'll work within stages of speed. So if you pick a cycle, it could be a 16-beat cycle, but you're in a medium speed.
Right.
You might play, like, single beat divisions first, and then move into either 1.5 or double, and then 3, and then 4, so that the feeling becomes faster, but the cycle is still remaining the same. You're just playing more intervals.
Right.
But just simply speeding up is part of it too. Like, especially at the end of a show, everyone's like, you know, just go.
And so in this process of making this record and kind of looking back over, you know, time that you had spent in a place that was very important to you, you mentioned before, you know, a kind of a journey from a dark place, from pain into something else. Were you surprised at the memories that this was bringing? I mean, did you remember things that you had forgotten?
I don't know if I think that much, to be honest, when I'm making music. I just sort of... I mean, I've been very fortunate to get to make a lot of music at this point, which is so wonderful. But like, I trust the process that like something hurts, I dig into it in that really safe place in the music, and something shifts. And analyzing it almost takes away from that. But like, I do notice that like when I'm playing, you know, to be able to play a piece of music 2 years down the road and be able to smile when you're playing it, even if it's come from something really broken, you know, that's such an incredible validating experience for life, you know? So I don't know if that answers your question, but like, it wasn't about specific memories or specific thoughts, but more just seeing how it can carry me through to be in connection with others and making music. And then occasionally you have the fortune of hearing back from other people, you know, once it goes out into the world, we start getting to hear back from other people what it does for them. And that just gets wild, you know, that it also maybe serves that purpose too.
Well, and especially with instrumental music, where, you know, people can put whatever they want into this vessel that you've created. The songwriter Paul Simon likes to say, the listener completes the song. And, you know, that's a songwriter who often has very specific imagery in his song, and it still allows us as listeners to get in there and figure out, oh, what does that mean to me?
Yeah. That's beautiful, and it makes sense, because you have to hand it over at some point. Like, it's not yours anymore once you pass. Like, you've done what, I have to speak for myself, but it's like I've done what I needed to do, and now it's out, and it's not mine, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's really beautiful.
So these pieces, it sounds like they come together in the studio through a fairly improvisatory process. And yet, you're here tonight, and you will play some of these pieces, so they have become repeatable works.
So this is, again, because 2% of what I do at this point is pure Indian classical music, and has been that way for a long time, but it's so ingrained in how I think that it's hard to, you know, it's part of how my brain works. It's operating from that place. So, you know, Indian classical music is improvised. So we learn repertoire, we memorize repertoire, and we improvise within it. So it's very kind of normal to be thinking in a creative way, even whilst thinking in a preservation concept, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. So for me, I mean, maybe, you know, different types of composers work differently, but almost all my compositions come from, it's improvising. You improvise it and you like it, so you write it down, and it becomes a composition. So so it's the same with these songs. I play an idea, I maybe play it 12 different ways. If we're editing, perhaps, then I've chosen a couple of them. And it almost becomes a challenge once we're on stage. I have to then, because obviously I've heard it 1,000 times, that becomes the composition, even if it was meant to be an improvisation. And on stage, I have to really sometimes challenge myself, like not to just play it the way I played it on the record, because that's where my brain is now treading. I have to still keep thinking of different ways to approach it. At most, what I always do in each tour that I plan, if it's like this where it's around specific albums, it is about certain repertoire, so it is limited in that sense. But I leave us all space. Like, every musician on stage has at least one or two big moments where they get to do whatever they want to do, and we come back into it. Or that even the composition has stretchiness to it, where it's not, we play this 6 times and then we play that. It's more, I play and then you listen out for me playing this one thing, and then we move on. And then you take a solo over me riffing on this, and then I'll hear when you're wrapping up. And then, so we all can be a little bit flowy about how we play, so it's not static.
I wonder whether you'll be able to do that with a symphony orchestra, though.
Well, my dad's 3 concerti and symphony are written with improvisation sections put in place. Mm-hmm. So as I've played those since I was a teenager, yes, you improvise, and they panic, bless them. It's really cute. Like, I have to like, some conductors have been incredible. And sometimes it's like we have to make an agreement that, like, I'm going to give you a 4-bar nod, you know, and that's like a pretty straightforward thing to do. I'm going to nod at you 4 bars ahead of the change, because the change isn't enough to hear, you know. But then, like, I have to be careful not to make eye contact by mistake, even, because some of them just, oh, she looked at me and that's the 4 bars. I'm like, no, I was just looking and smiling. Okay, no, and then I'm just like improvising, and then I'm like that, and then we move on. Yeah.
So is this the way you've always worked?
It's how I learned. I mean, I learned of music as a living thing. You know, for us, it's something very particular. Like something belongs to centuries and it belongs to this moment at the same time. I mean, the chapter 1 is called Forever for Now. It's like things are timeless and present and old all at the same time. So yeah, something can be a raga that's 1,000, or let's say 500 years old, but because you're playing it in that moment, you're extrapolating in your way, it's also being created right now. So there's this beautiful like genealogy that's happening within the music where you're connected through time. It's very special.
And when you go back to your earlier material, I'm talking about pre-trilogy, there are songs, there are pieces. The flamenco guitarists have their own set of forms that they play in. So these are pieces that have a kind of structure baked into them.
I guess, you know, tell me if you're getting bored of me. I start to feel like I'm, but what am I trying to say? Sometimes I make things sound easier than they really are. And it's because of the way I approach it. But it doesn't mean it's easy. It just means that I like flow. I like trying to be responsive to what's happening. But it doesn't work unless everyone in the room is coming with a certain level of either knowledge or skill or preparedness or humility. You know, if you've got people in the room who just want to show up with their ideas, it doesn't work. You have to be humble and curious. And there's a whole bunch of qualities that are required for this to make sense. And so, you know, you bring up the flamenco project, and that's a great example because putting together a whole album of, you know, Indian music and flamenco, or infused or inspired music. Once it came time to put it on the road, you know, I had 3 incredible, you know, Sevillan and Madrileño Spanish musicians who couldn't speak any English. I had 3 Indian musicians who couldn't speak any Spanish, and me with like 10 words of year 10 Spanish. And I basically had to teach the music to both parts of my group in 2 different ways. Because flamenco musicians count from the 12 of their cycle. They count from the last beat of a cycle. That's the emphasis. Whereas in Indian music, the beat 1 is the emphasis. We count from 1. So if I were to write a piece of music on paper and give it to both of them, I am not kidding, it was chaos. Because if it was written from 1, the flamenco musicians would keep stumbling because the accents were all wrong and inauthentic and didn't feel natural. Whereas if you gave it to the Indian musicians with it on beat 12, it just feels like you're speaking wrong, like garble. You can't do it. So I wrote the same song in 2 different ways. It was from beat 12 or it was from beat 1, and that's how I taught them each song. And when you did that, they played together perfectly. They could improvise, they could do complicated rhythm changes. They were thinking differently, but they were playing the same. So you have to find these weird little hooks in these processes between cultures and between traditions, either in the crunch of the clash or in a commonality. And when you get through it, it's magic. But there are crunchy bits, for sure.
I want to leave time for just a couple of questions from you folks here. I have a final question for you, though. About 10 years ago, you did an album called Home, which was Indian classical music. And I guess my question is, and you can take this literally or metaphorically, where is home for you? Is it?
I mean, in a way, that was something I dug into with the chapters as well, because I made chapter 1 in Europe, I made chapter 2 in California, where I'd lived for many years. And if I was explaining analytically, those would be my 3 places, you know, England, California, and India, which is, I still think that's where I come from. But I've lived there the least. But it's where my music comes from, so I feel a deeper root with that. And then my kids are growing up in London, so in a way, that's grounded me more than anything else ever has, because that now feels like home.
Anoushka is performing, as many of you probably know, at Town Hall on, today's Wednesday, so that's Friday night. That is sold out. You may not know that Anoushka and the band are performing tomorrow night at Le Poisson Rouge on Bleecker Street, and you can still get tickets, and that's the full set. But we're going to hear a nice taste of it in just a couple of minutes, but we do have time for a couple of questions. So, yes, we have a microphone here, so pass that down, please. Thank you.
So much, Ms. Shankar, for speaking with us. My name is Zahra Khan. My family's from Bhopal, India. I grew up in the Middle East and here, and your music has really helped me and my siblings connect with my family. We came from a family of Urdu poets, but never could fully connect with it. And thank you so much for your music. It's such a gift for our family. Now, as you talked about with your first chapter, as new generations of sort of second, third generations living outside of India are producing this music. Do you feel like it's changing? How is it changing? Especially if they're not visiting home as much, like their grandparents' home. Is that a thing?
I mean, I think it is a thing. It's happening in really exciting and beautiful ways all around the world. And I think, you know, the diaspora here in North America is so different from the diaspora in the UK or in Australia. And so there are these individual movements of how the music is developing or has, you know, through these generations that isn't even one story. You know, it's influenced in different ways across the world. And I think that's a beautiful thing. And I'm not sure I'm super clear which bit to respond to. I think the diaspora experience is equivalently valid to the home experience. So if it's someone with roots somewhere who hasn't visited that place as much as someone else who grew up there, that has no valuation in my brain. It's an authentic experience of what you were handed down and how you interpret it and what you make of it. And I think that's a really important and valuable thing for us to get to hear.
All right, good question. Anybody else? Over here.
Yeah. Hi, Anoushka. Yeah, thank you so much. And first of all, just grateful for your music. You know, like I'm here with my mom and dad, and you know, we listen to your music every day. You know, with breakfast,
Thank
sleeping.
you.
You
Sorry.
know, it's just Anoushka all the time. I don't think they have too much choice. Like it's just.
Okay.
But yeah, just the question for you is, it might be a bit of a generic question, but like, what is music, you know, for you and just generally, but like, what is music, even maybe beyond music, yeah. But yeah, what is music as Anoushka Shankar answers that? Yeah.
I'm just going to leave for half an hour while you answer that.
I think we touched on some of that when John talked about instrumental music. I think every form of art is a place where humans get to put a bit of their spirit, and that people who are receiving that art get to connect to their spirit by whatever response is evoked by that art form. I think some art forms are abstract and some are literal, you know, and so like the written word, for example, has a very particular value in the way it's telling you something, and we need that, you know, whereas a painting or music is a little bit more abstract, and it leaves a little space for like what needs to come out of us in order to be processed or responded to. So I think music is a place for us to connect to our spirit in whatever way that we need to, and that I truly, as hokey as it sounds, believe that makes the world better, because we all need those things that help us connect to that bit that uplifts us, so that we do that collectively too.
Thank you so much. Yeah.
Well, I think that's really well said, and I'm going to give you a couple of minutes to get the band together. Go herd those cats.
Okay.
And
Thank you guys
thank
so
you
much.
all
I'll
for
see you in a bit.
being here. And
Thank you,
live
John, as
music
well.
still to come.